The scent of rain-soaked asphalt and betrayal clung to the air, a perfume Alara Vance never thought she'd wear. It was the scent of her 10th wedding anniversary. It was the scent of the end of her world, a world she had meticulously designed, only to find herself a ghost within its walls. She stood in the cavernous, minimalist living room of their glass and steel home, a testament to her own architectural genius. Every line, every shadow, every pane of glass that framed the sweeping Los Angeles skyline was a word in a story she thought they were writing together. Now, she saw it for what it was, a beautiful, sterile cage on the polished marble of the kitchen island, where champagne and a single red rose should have been, laid 2 documents. The first was a legal notice, cold and impersonal, a petition for the dissolution of their marriage, citing the boilerplate excuse of irreconcilable differences. The second was a glossy, freshly printed press release from Thorne Industries. It announced a bold new direction, a strategic partnership with a rising star named Anya Petrova, who was being appointed as the new Chief Innovation Officer. Her title, the position she had created, the role she had embodied for a decade without ever needing the official nameplate. The precise, expensive click of the front door opening sent a tremor through the floor. Marcus Thorne strode in, shrugging off his $1,000 coat with the casual grace of a man who owned the world. He looked exactly like the man from the cover of Forbes and Wired, because he had been, multiple times. He was a titan of technology, a visionary, the charismatic face of a global empire. He was also the architect of her annihilation. "Alara," he said. His voice was as smooth as aged whiskey, the same voice that had once promised her forever under a canopy of desert stars. "I see you got the papers. I thought it would be cleaner this way." Cleaner. The word was a shard of glass in her throat. Her hand trembled as she gestured from the divorce filing to the corporate statement. "You're divorcing me and replacing me with my own protege on our anniversary, and you have the audacity to call it clean." He had the nerve to look weary, as if her pain was a tedious, administrative task. Business has to be unsentimental. Alara, you know that. Anya has a forward-thinking vision. She's hungry. You've gotten comfortable. Comfortable. The word was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Comfortable. She had sacrificed her own celebrated architectural career, a career that was taking flight, to help him build Thorne Industries from a sputtering idea in a dusty garage into the behemoth it was today. Her design philosophies were embedded in the DNA of their products. Her strategies for user experience were the bedrock of their market dominance. Her late nights, her unwavering belief, her intellectual fire, they were the invisible scaffolding holding up his throne. He was the king, but she had drawn the maps to the kingdom. "I was the one who sketched the first interface for Helios on a cocktail napkin at that bar in Soho. Marcus," she said, her voice dangerously low, trembling with a rage so cold it burned. "I was the one who stayed up for 72 hours straight, living on coffee and adrenaline, to debug the core code for the IPO launch. I built this company with you. This wasn't just a job. It was our life. It was my life's work," he corrected her, and the casual cruelty of it stole her breath. His eyes, once warm and full of shared dreams, were now chips of glacial ice. "You were a tremendous support, but a company, like any organism, must evolve or die, and frankly, so must I." He straightened his tie, a preening gesture of finality. "The house is yours. Of course, my lawyers have structured a generous settlement. You won't have to worry about a thing." And that was it, the final. Killing insult, The casual wave of his hand, dismissing a decade of her life, her love, her genius, as something that could be compensated with a piece of property. He didn't see a partner he was betraying. He saw a line item he was closing out. He was not just leaving her, he was erasing her. She watched him walk towards their bedroom, the one with a window she had designed to catch the morning light perfectly, to pack a single, prearranged suitcase. In that moment, as the shock receded, something inside her shifted. The heart-wrenching agony didn't vanish, but it began to crystallize. It was the transmutation of grief into something harder, something colder. It was the birth of a diamond in the crushing pressure of his betrayal. He thought he was leaving her with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving her with a reason. He emerged moments later and paused at the door. A flicker of something, was it pity, or just condescension in his gaze? Don't take it personally. Alara, it's just how the game is played. He left. The solid oak door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cathedral-like silence of the house. Alara didn't scream. She didn't shatter. She walked on steady feet to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the glittering, indifferent city skyline. For 10 years, she had looked at that view and seen their kingdom. Tonight, for the first time, she saw a battlefield. The settlement he'd called generous was, in reality, a masterclass in legal cruelty. Her name, she discovered, was on none of the key patents. Her foundational contributions had been legally defined as informal spousal support. His team of corporate sharks had systematically walled her off from any real claim to the fortune she had helped create. She was left with the house, a beautiful, empty cage with a mortgage she could no longer afford, and a severance package that was, compared to the company's valuation, an accounting error. He had written her out of her own story. The media was a pack of wolves. Thorne shakes up C-suite, divorces architect wife. One headline blared. Anya Petrova, the new visionary at Thorne's side, screamed another. They painted her as the tragic, domestic figure, the woman left behind while the real players forged the future. Each article, each photograph of Marcus and Anya looking brilliant and triumphant, was a fresh stab of public humiliation. One rain-lashed Tuesday night. A month later, drowning in a sea of red-stamped bills and threatening letters from the bank, she found herself in the one place she hadn't been able to face, the attic. It was a tomb of their shared past, but in a forgotten corner, beneath a dust-caked canvas sheet, was a heavy-duty storage trunk. Her past, her life, before him. With aching muscles, she pried it open. The smell of old paper and graphite filled the air. Inside were her old architectural sketchbooks, filled with elegant, impossible buildings, her university degrees, her blueprints for a life she had deferred, and buried at the very bottom, nestled in protective foam, was a sleek, black external hard drive. The label, written in her own neat script, sent a jolt through her. Project Chimera. It was her secret magnum opus, an idea so ambitious, so paradigm-shifting, that it had frightened Marcus. It was a concept for a fully integrated, predictive, and intuitive city management AI, a single, unified system that could learn and optimize everything from traffic grids and energy consumption to emergency service deployment and sustainable urban planning. It was smart infrastructure on a scale no one had ever attempted. He had called it a beautiful fantasy, unbuildable, unscalable, unsellable, he'd decreed, pushing her to focus on the more profitable, bite-sized consumer apps that had become the cash cows for Thorne Industries. He had told her to put it away, and she, trusting him, had. Her hands trembled as she carried the hard drive downstairs. Wiping the dust away with the sleeve of her sweater, she sat at her stark, empty desk, the place where she had once helped build his empire, and plugged the drive into her laptop for a moment. There was nothing. Then, the screen flickered, a file directory bloomed into view, a forest of data and design documents she hadn't seen in years. She clicked open the core prospectus. The screen filled with her own words, her own diagrams, her own boundless vision. It was all there. The code framework, the neural network architecture, the dream. He had called it a fantasy, looking at it now, in the ruins of her life. Alara knew it wasn't a fantasy. It was a prophecy. It was the blueprint for her resurrection, for 3 days and 3 nights. Alara lived inside the digital world of Chimera. The sun rose and set outside the great glass walls of her house, but she barely noticed, fueled by stale coffee and a burning, righteous fury. She immersed herself in the complex architecture of her own creation. The code was elegant, the systems interwoven with the precision of a master watchmaker. It was more than viable, it was genius, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it would work. But she also knew she couldn't build it alone. She was the architect, the visionary. She needed a master builder, a coder who could not just write lines, but who could breathe life into a complex digital ecosystem. She needed someone who understood the foundational languages of creation, not just the slick, superficial applications that Thorne Industries now churned out. Her mind sifted through the ghosts of the company's past, through the faces of the brilliant minds Marcus had acquired, used, and discarded on his ascent. One name surfaced from the depths, a name spoken with a mixture of reverence and frustration in the early days. Julian Croft. He had been Thorne Industries' first head of engineering, a programming purist, a cantankerous genius who saw code as poetry. Julian built things to last, to be perfect. Marcus, driven by his mantra of move fast and break things, saw him as a bottleneck. Julian would refuse to release a product with even a minor flaw. While Marcus wanted to push betas to market and patch them later, their clashes were legendary, eventually. Marcus, bolstered by a board of yes-men, had forced him out, labeling the 50-year-old programmer obsolete, a relic in a world that prized speed over stability. Julian had been the soul of the machine, just as she had been the soul of the design. Marcus had excised them both. Finding him was a challenge. He had fallen completely off the grid. No social media, no digital footprint. It was as if he'd intentionally erased himself from the world he helped build. Alara spent 2 days calling old, low-level contacts, people who might remember, people who weren't in Marcus's inner circle. Finally, a former HR assistant, a woman Julian had once defended from a round of layoffs, gave her an address. It wasn't in a trendy tech hub or a gated community. It was in a quiet, forgotten suburb an hour east of the city, a place of cracked sidewalks and sun-bleached houses. She drove there in her pristine, company-issued car, one of the last vestiges of her old life, and it felt alien on the sleepy, suburban street. The house was a small, unassuming bungalow, the lawn slightly overgrown. The only hint of the occupant within was a small satellite dish on the roof, bristling with more antennae than a military installation. She knocked, after a long moment. The door creaked open a few inches, held by a chain, a pair of sharp, intelligent eyes, framed by a wild mane of graying hair and a formidable beard, peered out at her. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying," a gravelly voice grumbled. Julian Croft, Alara asked, her own voice steadier than she felt. My name is Alara Vance. I used to work with Marcus. The name was like a key turning a rusty lock. The suspicion in his eyes hardened into outright hostility. Thorne's wife? I remember. Come to serve me some papers. Is he suing me for being alive? He's divorcing me, she said flatly. He fired me, too. In a manner of speaking. The door closed. Alara's heart sank. She had come all this way for nothing. But then she heard the rattle of the chain, and the door swung fully open. Julian Croft stood there, wearing a faded t-shirt with a cryptic line of code on it and cargo pants stained with what looked like solder. He looked her up and down, his gaze analytical, and then jerked his head inward. Get in. You're letting the air out. The inside of the house was an organized chaos of technology. Stacks of servers hummed softly in the living room, cooled by a complex arrangement of fans. Wires snaked across the floor like vines. The air smelled of ozone, old coffee, and dust. It was the den of a digital hermit. So the golden boy finally tossed you from the nest, Julian said. Not unkindly. He didn't offer her a seat. Can't say I'm surprised. He was always a taker, a user. A suit with a silver tongue who could sell a man his own shoes and make him say thank you. He took everything. Julian, Alara said, cutting straight to the point. There was no room for pleasantries. The patents, the credit, the company. He left me with a mountain of debt and a press release. Sounds about right. He grunted. Disappearing into the kitchen. He returned with 2 mugs of black. Tar-like coffee and handed one to her. So, what do you want from me? Sympathy, I'm fresh out. The world's full of sad stories. This was the moment. She didn't beg. She didn't appeal to his pity. She appealed to his genius. She took her laptop from her bag, set it on a clear patch of a workbench, and opened the master file for Project Chimera. I don't want sympathy, she said, turning the screen towards him. I want a partner. I want to build this. Julian squinted at the screen, his initial expression one of bored indifference. He leaned closer, his eyes, accustomed to scanning thousands of lines of code, moved over her architectural diagrams, her logic flows, her system's schematics. The cynical slouch in his posture began to straighten. He took the laptop from her, his movement suddenly energized, and started scrolling, faster and faster. Silence descended, broken only by the hum of the servers and the frantic clicking of the trackpad. He dove into the subfolders, pulling up data models and core programming concepts. He muttered to himself, tracing lines on the screen with a calloused finger. This is a predictive public transit algorithm based on real-time pedestrian flow. My God, the processing load. He navigated deeper. And this, a dynamic energy grid that reroutes power based on anticipated demand. Not just current usage. It's insane. He looked up at her, and for the first time, the hostility was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated awe. It was the look of one creator recognizing another. This is not an app. Vance, he whispered, his voice full of a reverence she hadn't heard since she first conceived the idea. This is a digital god. Marcus called it a fantasy, she said quietly. Julian let out a short, bark-like laugh, devoid of humor. Of course he did. He wouldn't understand it. Marcus can't build, he can only acquire. He doesn't see the cathedral. He only sees the bricks he can sell. I know because he did the same thing to me, to my work. He leaned back, his eyes distant. The core operating system for Helios the stable, elegant foundation that everything else was built on. That was mine. He called it clunky and slow. Then he had his new team of kids slap a shiny interface on it, add a few flashy, useless features, and called himself a visionary. He didn't fire me because I was obsolete. He fired me because I knew the truth, because I wouldn't let him break my work to make a quick buck. Their eyes met in a moment of profound, unspoken understanding. They were two sides of the same coin, two architects of an empire from which they had been exiled. "He stole your foundation," Alara said. "He stole my designs, and he built his throne on top of them." "So what's the plan?" Architect Julian asked, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You gonna use this chimera to build a better world?" "First," Alara said, a shard of ice in her voice, "I'm going to use it to burn his kingdom to the ground." A slow grin spread across Julian Croft's bearded face. It was the most beautiful thing Alara had seen in months. "All right, Vance, you've got yourself a builder." They didn't shake on it. They didn't need to. The alliance was forged in the fires of a shared betrayal that afternoon. They began moving his most essential servers into the cavernous, empty garage of Alara's mansion. It was the same garage where she and Marcus had started Thorn Industries 10 years ago, full of hope and ambition, as Julian connected the last monitor. The dusty space was filled with the familiar, gentle hum of creation. It was a symbolic reclamation of her past, a rededication of the ground where her dream had first been betrayed. They were starting over, surrounded by the ghosts of what was, to build the reality of what would be. This time, it was on her terms. They needed a name, not just a project title, but an identity, a banner for their nascent rebellion, for 2 days. They debated while Julian configured the last of his salvaged servers and Alara mapped out a brutal, impossibly optimistic development schedule on a massive whiteboard, something that doesn't sound like it was conceived by a 22-year-old in a hoodie. Julian grumbled, stripping a network cable with his teeth. No I-Fi. Lie or R at the end. Alara looked at the complex world she was designing, a system built on principle, on a noble foundation. An old Anglo-Saxon word came to her, a word signifying nobility and heritage. Ethel, she said, spelled A-E-T-H-E-L. Julian stopped his work and tasted the word. Ethel. Sounds old, sounds solid. He gave a rare, approving nod. I can live with that. Ethel it is. And so, Ethel was born in a cavernous garage, with a staff of 2, a budget cobbled together from the dregs of a broken marriage, and an ambition to challenge a god of the industry. The months that followed were a blur of grueling, relentless work. The garage, once a pristine space for luxury cars, became their crucible. Whiteboards covered every vertical surface, filled with Alara's elegant architectural handwriting and Julian's chaotic, sprawling code notations. Empty pizza boxes stacked up in one corner, a monument to their skipped meals. The hum of the servers was the constant soundtrack to their lives, a lullaby of progress. They operated like a 2-person army, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and a deep, abiding hatred for the man in the glass tower downtown. Alara quickly discovered that dreaming and building were only half the battle. The other half was survival, the money Marcus had left her, which had once seemed like a fortune to a person who had never had to worry about it, evaporated with frightening speed. Server components, software licenses, power consumption. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. The property taxes on the mansion alone were enough to bankrupt a small company. One by one, the vestiges of her old life were sacrificed at the altar of Ethel. First went the jewelry, the diamond earrings from Marcus, the anniversary watch. They fetched a handsome price, funding their hardware for the first 2 months. Then went the art. Minimalist paintings she had once loved, Now just capital assets. Finally, with a pang of regret that was more symbolic than sentimental, she sold the sleek, silver sports car. She watched the dealer drive it away and then walked to the bus stop. The new CEO of Ethel, her purse heavy with a cashier's check that would keep their dream alive for another quarter. Word of her new venture eventually reached the gleaming headquarters of Thorne Industries. At first, Marcus was amused. He heard through the grapevine that his ex-wife was tinkering in their old garage with that dinosaur Croft. He pictured it as a pathetic hobby, the sad, desperate attempt of a discarded woman to feel relevant. He even bragged about it at a cocktail party. "She's trying to build it a company," he said with a magnanimous chuckle. "It's sweet. Good for her." But Marcus Thorne didn't become a titan by allowing loose ends. Even a pathetic joke, if left unchecked, could become a nuisance. His ego demanded absolute victory, absolute humiliation. The sabotage was never overt, never traceable back to him. It was subtle, a quiet exercise of his immense power. The specialized processing chips they had ordered from a supplier in Taiwan were suddenly hit with an indefinite production delay. The young, brilliant coder they had tried to recruit, a woman disillusioned with corporate life, abruptly stopped answering their calls after receiving an anonymous, six-figure job offer from a mysterious shell company. The application for a small business grant Alara had spent a week perfecting was lost in a sea of bureaucratic red tape. Marcus didn't need to crush them with a hammer. He could simply suffocate them by consuming all the oxygen in the room. It was after the supplier cancellation that Julian almost broke. He threw a wrench across the garage, where it clanged against the metal shelving with a sound of pure frustration.
"It's him! Alara, it's got to be him! We can't fight that. He's an octopus with tentacles in every part of this industry. We're just two people in a garage. We're finished."
Alara looked at him, her face calm, her eyes like chips of flint. The panic, the despair that might have once consumed her was gone, burned away in the fire of her new purpose.
"Yes,
it's him," she said, her voice even and cold. "And this is exactly what he expects. He expects us to get frustrated. He expects us to give up. He expects you to throw a wrench and for me to cry. We will not be giving him the satisfaction." She turned back to her monitor and began typing. "I have a list of architectural hardware suppliers from my old career. They don't normally work with tech components, but their supply chains are different. They don't run through Silicon Valley. I'll make some calls." Julian stared at her. In that moment, he didn't see the elegant, heartbroken woman who had shown up at his door months ago. He saw a general. He saw a leader forged in the crucible of betrayal, whose resolve had been hardened into something unbreakable. He picked up his wrench and went back to work without another word. This was Alara's transformation. She became the leader she never knew she had to be. She was the project manager, the CFO, the head of HR, and the lead negotiator. She was ruthless with their budget, finding open-source software to replace expensive licenses, learning to repair server components herself from online tutorials. She inspired a fierce loyalty in Julian, not with grand speeches, but with her own quiet, relentless competence. They even managed to grow. They hired 2 young engineers, misfits like themselves. One was a self-taught prodigy who had dropped out of Stanford because he found it unimaginative. The other was a data analyst who had been fired from a rival firm for raising ethical questions about how they used customer information. They weren't looking for prestige or a big paycheck. They were looking for a mission. They found one at Ethel. After 9 months of 16-hour days, they had it. Late one night, with the 4 of them gathered around a central monitor, Alara initiated the first full diagnostic sequence. They watched as the lines of code scrolled, as systems spoke to each other, as the complex digital brain of Chimera awoke for the first time. It was a closed simulation, a tiny digital sandbox representing a single square mile of a city. They fed it traffic data, a simulated power outage, a hypothetical 5-car pileup. And it worked. Chimera's code flowed, analyzed, and responded. It rerouted the simulated traffic flawlessly. It shifted power from low-priority zones to the virtual hospital. It dispatched emergency services with an efficiency that was 10 times the human standard. It was alive. They were exhausted. They were practically broke. They were a tiny, insignificant speck in an industry of giants. But as they looked at the screen, at the elegant, logical dance of their creation, they weren't just 4 renegades in a garage. They were an army, and they had just won the first battle of a very long, silent war. The successful simulation of Chimera was a heady, intoxicating victory that lasted for approximately 12 hours. Then, reality came crashing back in. Their bank account was a wasteland. The final cashier's check from the sale of Alara's car had been spent. They had a functioning proof of concept, a miracle of engineering humming away in a garage, but they were running on fumes. The next electricity bill would be the final nail in their coffin. We have 3 weeks. Maybe 4? Before I have to start cannibalizing the servers for parts to sell on eBay, Julian said, his voice a grim monotone as he stared at their bleak financial projections. It was a good run. Architect? No, Alara said, her voice sharp. A good run is not the end of the story. It's the end of a chapter. We don't need a venture capitalist. They'll want control. They'll want to dilute the vision. We need a client. One client. But who would gamble on a company with no track record, no capital, and a CEO whose most recent press involved a humiliating divorce? The big cities Los Angeles, New York, Chicago were impenetrable fortresses, their tech contracts locked up by giants like Thorne Industries. So Alara started looking elsewhere. She scoured the internet, not for tech news, but for news of civic desperation. She searched for keywords like infrastructure crisis, budget shortfall, and grid failure. Her search led her to a place 1,000 miles from the California coast, New Hope, Pennsylvania, a former steel town. New Hope was a case study in urban decay when the mills closed. The city's heart had been ripped out, leaving behind a crumbling infrastructure, a dwindling population, and a government drowning in debt. Their attempts to attract new industries were failing because the city itself was failing. The traffic system was a perpetual clog. The power grid was unreliable, and emergency response times were a tragic joke. New Hope wasn't looking for a cutting-edge upgrade, it was looking for a lifeline. Ilara found an article quoting a frustrated, mid-level city manager named Maria Sanchez. "We are tired of patching holes in a sinking ship." Sanchez had said, "We need a new ship." Ilara had found her target. She didn't call the mayor's office. She called Maria Sanchez directly. 2 weeks later, Ilara and Julian stood in the drab, wood-paneled conference room of New Hope City Hall. The air smelled of damp paper and defeat. Across the table sat the city council 5 weary, skeptical, middle-aged men and 1 woman. Maria Sanchez, who watched Ilara with an expression of guarded curiosity. Julian, who hated public speaking and had been dragged along as the technical expert, immediately put them on edge with his gruff, no-nonsense answers. But then Ilara began to speak. She didn't give them a slick sales pitch. She laid out a diagnosis of their city's problem with the precision of a surgeon. Using their own public data, she showed them, in stark detail, how their systems were failing. Then she presented the solution, not as a magical black box, but as a logical, architectural system. She spoke their language, the language of logistics, budgets, and public service. Chimera is not about replacing your people, she explained, her voice calm and confident. It's about giving them the right information before they even know they need it. It's about turning a reactive system into a predictive one. The council was skeptical. This sounds expensive. The council president grumbled, and what does a Los Angeles tech firm know about our problems? We're not a firm, Alara corrected him gently. We're a team of 4 people in a garage. And as for the cost, we'll defer it. We are asking for a chance to prove our value. Give us 1 district, the most troubled one. Give us a 3-month trial. If we don't dramatically improve traffic flow, energy efficiency, and emergency response times, you pay us nothing. You can tell the world we failed. It was an insane gamble, and Julian shot her a panicked look, but Maria Sanchez leaned forward. With all due respect, Mr. President, she said to the council, what do we have to lose? Our current systems are already failing. This is a no-risk shot at a miracle. Desperation, and Maria's passionate advocacy won the day. Ethel had its first client. The next month was a whirlwind. The Ethel team relocated to a cramped, rented office in New Hope. The reality on the ground was worse than the data suggested. They were working with ancient sensors, spotty 3G networks, and a cynical municipal workforce who saw them as the latest in a long line of consultants who would promise the world and deliver nothing. But here, their small size was a tremendous advantage. When a sensor failed, Julian didn't file a report. He went out with a soldering iron and fixed it himself when the network was too slow. Their young engineers wrote brilliant compression algorithms on the fly. Alara spent her days not in an office, but with the dispatchers, the power grid technicians, the traffic cops, learning their pain points and tailoring Chimera's interface to their exact needs. They weren't consultants, they were partners. The day of the launch was nerve-wracking. In the city's central command center, Alara, Julian, and Maria Sanchez watched the main screen, where Chimera's clean. Elegant interface was now overlaid on the district map for hours. Things were quiet. The AI was working, subtly rerouting traffic, making minor adjustments to the power grid. But there was no dramatic proof of its power. The council president was already starting to look smug. Then, at 5:17 p.m. during the height of rush hour, it happened, a 24-inch water main, a piece of infrastructure dating back to the 1950s, burst under a key intersection. On the old system, it would have been chaos. A call would have come in, a dispatcher would have tried to locate a crew, police would have been sent to block traffic, but only after a massive gridlock had already formed. It would have taken hours to control. Chimera responded in 1.2 seconds, before a single human knew what had happened. The AI detected the pressure drop and water flow anomaly on the screen. Its response was a beautiful, logical cascade. It instantly rerouted all traffic away from the affected area, changing traffic light patterns 6 blocks in every direction to create a clear path for emergency vehicles. It simultaneously dispatched a public works crew, sending them a detailed report of the break's location, the pipe specifications, and the necessary equipment. It identified the closest fire hydrants to the break and preemptively lowered water pressure to the surrounding zone to prevent further bursts. While maintaining full pressure for the local hospital, by the time the first 911 call came in from a confused motorist, the situation was already under control. The council members stared at the screen, their mouths agape. They had just witnessed a civic catastrophe averted in less time than it took to make a pot of coffee. The results from the 3-month trial were staggering. Traffic congestion in the pilot district dropped by 32%. Emergency response times were cut by nearly 60%. Citywide energy waste fell by 15% as Chimera intelligently managed the power grid. Ethel hadn't just met their promises, they had shattered them. The story was too good to stay local. It started with a small article in the New Hope Chronicle. A regional tech blog picked it up. Then, a journalist from a national wire service, intrigued by the Miracle AI story, wrote a feature piece. The headline went viral. Phoenix from the Ashes: How a Scrappy Startup and Its Enigmatic CEO Resurrected a Dying American City. Miles away, in his glass and steel tower in Los Angeles, Marcus Thorne was in a board meeting, presenting rosy projections for the next quarter. His phone, lying on the polished table, buzzed with a news alert. He glanced down, expecting to see his own name. Instead, he saw hers. He read the headline, his confident smile tightening into a thin, hard line. He clicked the link and saw a picture of Alara, standing beside Maria Sanchez in front of New Hope's City Hall. She wasn't the broken, tragic woman he had discarded. She looked powerful, composed, dangerous. The amusement was gone. The condescension had vanished. In their place was the cold, furious recognition of a king who had just heard the sound of a rival army's trumpets, blowing loud and clear from across the valley. The joke was over. The success of the New Hope project was a paradigm shift. Ethel was no longer a ghost. They were a force. Inquiries started pouring in from other struggling cities across the Rust Belt. Municipalities that had been ignored by the tech giants for years. They didn't just want Chimera, they wanted the Ethel team. The people who listened for the first time. Alara was turning down offers, carefully selecting their next partner, building a strategy for controlled, sustainable growth. In his Los Angeles high-rise, Marcus Thorne watched this unfold with a fury that was cold and absolute. This was no longer a personal matter, a laughable project by his discarded wife. This was a threat to his market. Alara wasn't just building a company, she was creating a new paradigm, one based on partnership and genuine innovation, and it made his own company's model of aggressive acquisition and iterative updates look predatory and obsolete. She was making him look like a dinosaur. He would not allow it. He convened a meeting, not with his board of directors, but with a different kind of team. It was a small clandestine unit of cybersecurity specialists known internally as the Solutions Group. They were the digital scalpels he used to excise competition, acquire intellectual property, and solve problems that couldn't be solved with lawyers. Their leader, a man known only as Silas, was gaunt, sharp-featured, and utterly devoid of ethics. Ethel is running its operations on a proprietary AI, Marcus said, his voice flat and hard. They call it Chimera. My sources tell me it's revolutionary. I want it. Every line of code. I want to own their miracle. Silas nodded once, a flicker of understanding in his dark eyes. Consider it done. The attack came 3 nights later. It was not a clumsy brute force assault. It was a symphony of sabotage, a sophisticated phishing email targeting one of their junior engineers, a 0-day exploit hidden in a routine software update, and a denial-of-service attack to mask the real intrusion. It was designed to be overwhelming, untraceable, and final. Alarms blared in Ethel's modest headquarters, the rented office space in New Hope they now called home. Their 2 young engineers scrambled, their faces pale with panic as they watched their defenses being systematically bypassed.
"They're through the outer firewall," one shouted. "I can't stop them."
But Julian was a pillar of unnatural calm. He sat before his central console, his fingers flying across the keyboard, not in a panic, but with the focused intensity of a chess master. A slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Let them come," he muttered.
Alara stood behind him, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Julian."
"I've been waiting for this. Architect," he said. his eyes never leaving the screen. "You don't think I'd build our fortress on open ground? I built it on a graveyard." He pointed to a scrolling log of data. "They think they're accessing Chimera's core. They're not. They're in the honeypot. A perfect decoy of our system, designed to look and feel exactly like the real thing." The junior engineers stared, dumbfounded. Julian had built a digital mousetrap, and Marcus's elite team had just walked right into it. Every command they issue, every file they try to access. "It's being logged," Julian explained. "They're handing us their playbook, but that's not even the best part." His smile widened. "The bait in this trap is special. The decoy code contains a parasitic algorithm I designed years ago, when they copy the files. The parasite latches onto their extraction tool. It's going to ride the data stream right back to where it came from." For 10 agonizing minutes, they watched as the intruders meticulously copied the entire decoy system. Then, as expected, the intruders vanished, wiping their tracks clean. Or so they thought. A new window opened on Julian's screen. It was a raw data feed, unstable and flickering. "There it is," he whispered in triumph. "The parasite is active. It created an unstable wormhole, a backscatter connection to their server. It won't last long. They knocked on our front door. Alara, now we get to look through their mail slot." They didn't have much time. "What are we looking for?" Alara asked, her heart pounding. "The crown jewels," Julian said, his fingers a blur. "Helios 2.0, his flagship, his multi-billion-dollar cash cow." He bypassed security protocols with a speed that was breathtaking, a master navigating his own stolen work. He found the source code for Helios 2.0 and began scrolling through the foundational layers. The kernel of the operating system. He froze. The color drained from his face. "That son of a bitch," he breathed. Alara leaned closer. "What is it?" "It's here," he said, his voice a mixture of horror and vindication. "My original code, the OS he called clunky and slow. He didn't just slap a new interface on it. He used it as the core for everything. Everything. Helios is built on a lie. It's built on my work." The audacity of it was staggering. Marcus hadn't just stolen from them in the past. His entire current empire, his public persona as a visionary, was predicated on a fundamental, ongoing fraud. But then Julian's expression shifted from anger to something else, something sharp and dangerous. He was arrogant. Julian whispered. He was so sure I was just a dinosaur he'd put out to pasture. He never imagined I'd see this again. He never imagined... The signature. "Signature?" Alara asked. Julian looked at her, and the light in his eyes was the gleam of a buried sword finally seeing the sun. Back then, Alara, I never fully trusted him. I always felt he was a thief wearing a king's robes. So, I put something in the deepest layer of my original code, a failsafe. It's not a virus, it's not a backdoor, it's a dormant, recursive algorithm, a cryptographic watermark woven into the very fabric of the code. It's been sitting there, inert, for over 10 years. He opened a small, encrypted file on his local machine. It contained a single, impossibly complex alphanumeric key. "When this key is introduced to the system," Julian explained, his voice low and steady, "the algorithm activates. It doesn't crash the system. It doesn't destroy data. It does something much worse. It initiates a permanent, irreversible change to the code's visual output. It reveals a message, my signature, my name, a ghost in his machine that he can never exorcise." They stared at the screen, at the stolen code of Helios 2.0, and then at the activation key. The air in the room was thick with the gravity of their discovery. The silent war was no longer about competition. It was no longer about building a better product. Marcus had tried to steal their future in doing so. He had given them the key to his past. They didn't just have a rival company anymore. They had a weapon of mass destruction. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. Alara Vance was no longer the underdog. She was the executioner, holding the signed, sealed death warrant for the man who had wronged her. The only question left was when and where she would choose to swing the axe. The Innovate Future Summit was the glittering apex of the tech world. And this year, it was Marcus Thorne's coronation, hosted by Thorne Industries at the largest convention center in San Francisco. The event was a monument to his ego. The air buzzed with the energy of thousands of developers, investors, and journalists, all gathered to witness the future, as defined by Marcus. The climax of the summit was to be the announcement of a historic merger with Omnicorp, a global manufacturing and logistics conglomerate. The deal would not just make Marcus a titan, it would make him a king, his influence extending into every corner of modern life. Alara Vance had an invitation, not as a guest, but as a speaker. Ethel's Cinderella story was the talk of the industry and the summit organizers, eager to show they had their finger on the pulse, had given her a 15-minute innovator spotlight slot. It was meant to be an appetizer before the main course of Marcus's grand announcement. When she arrived backstage, the contrast was stark. She was an island of calm in a sea of frantic energy. She wore a simple, impeccably tailored black dress, her only adornment a small, silver pin of the Ethel logo. She radiated a quiet, unshakable power that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Marcus saw her and strode over, his smile wide, but his eyes cold. Alara, so glad you could make it. It's good to see you landing on your feet. This must be a big day for your little company. The condescension dripped from every word. It's a big day for the entire industry. Marcus, she replied, her voice smooth as polished steel. Things have a way of finding their level. His smile tightened before he was pulled away by the CEO of Omnicorp, a stern-faced German named Klaus Richter. Marcus's keynote was a masterclass in charisma. He prowled the stage, painting a dazzling picture of the future, a future powered by the synergy of Thorne Industries and Omnicorp. He was met with thunderous applause. Then, as Alara waited in the wings, he took his seat in the front row, directly in her line of sight, flanked by Klaus Richter and a beaming Anya Petrova. He looked untouchable. The announcer called her name, and now, for our innovator spotlight. Please welcome the CEO of Athol, the woman behind the New Hope miracle, Alara Vance. Alara walked onto the stage. The massive LED screens behind her displayed the elegant, minimalist Ethel logo. She walked to the center of the stage, took a breath, and looked directly at Marcus. Good afternoon, she began, her voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the cavernous hall. I'm here to talk about innovation, but before we can talk about the future, we have to be honest about the past. We have to be honest about the foundations we build upon. A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the expected rah-rah speech of an upstart CEO. Marcus's smile flickered. Great companies, like great buildings, require a solid foundation. Alara continued, an architectural vision and a master builder to execute that vision. Thorne Industries had both. In the beginning, she started to tell a story. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. She spoke of a brilliant programmer, a purist who built an operating system so stable and elegant, it was like poetry in code. only to be exiled and called obsolete. She spoke of a visionary architect who designed the user experiences and core strategies that would make the company billions, only to be erased from the story and told she had gotten comfortable. She never used her own name or Julian's. She didn't have to. Marcus was no longer smiling. His face was a mask of disbelief, slowly hardening into fury. Anya shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Klaus Richter looked from Alara on stage to Marcus in the front row, a deep frown forming on his face. The narrative of the lone genius is a powerful myth, Alara said, her gaze unwavering, but it is so often a lie. A lie used to hide the truth. But proof, in our industry, is not found in stories. It is found in the code. She gestured to the main screen. The Ethel logo dissolved, replaced by a live diagnostic of the very Helios 2.0 system that was running the summit's presentation software. I'm told this is the most secure operating system in the world, Alara said, a dangerous edge to her voice. I'm going to introduce a single string of data into its core, not a virus, not a hack, an activation key, from a small, custom-built device in her hand. She wirelessly transmitted the key. In his remote headquarters, Julian Croft, watching the live feed with the rest of the Ethel team, hit enter. For a single, breathless second, nothing happened. Then, the slick, corporate interface of Helios 2.0 on the giant screen began to twitch. The graphics corrupted the code itself, now visible to the thousands of stunned onlookers, began to rearrange itself as if possessed by a ghost. Lines of programming morphed and twisted, coalescing into a new message that burned itself onto the screen in a simple, monospaced font, overriding everything. It was a digital signature, an indelible birthmark. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The system, its foundational logic now fundamentally altered, couldn't hold. The screens went black. The lights in the hall flickered and died, plunging the room into a semi-darkness, lit only by the glow of thousands of cell phones. The global live stream cut to a blank error message. Chaos erupted. Investors were screaming into their phones. Journalists were scrambling over chairs, shouting questions. Marcus Thorne sat frozen in the front row, his face ashen, the picture of a king whose castle had just dissolved into dust around him. Klaus Richter stared at him with pure, unmitigated contempt, stood up, and walked off the stage without a word. The multi-billion-dollar merger was not just dead, it had been publicly executed. In the ensuing pandemonium, Anya Petrova saw her own future evaporating, ever the survivor. She quietly slipped away from the front row. She pulled out her phone, but she wasn't calling her lawyer. Her fingers, trembling slightly, dialed the direct number for the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. She had seen the fall of one king today. She had no intention of being dragged down with him. She would trade her testimony for immunity, offering up the internal documents she had saved as an insurance policy. It was the final, most fitting betrayal. Alara didn't stay to watch the full implosion. Her work was done. She walked calmly off the stage, past the shouting and the chaos, her expression not of triumph, not of glee, but of a profound and quiet finality. She had not come here for revenge. She had come for the truth, and the truth had just set her, and the rest of the world, free. The fallout from what the media dubbed the summit execution was not just swift, it was biblical. By the time the markets opened the next morning, Thorne Industries was a ghost ship. Its stock price in freefall, the world's most respected tech company had become a penny stock in less than 12 hours. The headlines were a feeding frenzy. Ghost in the Machine Thorn empire built on decade of fraud. The Architect's Revenge, who is Alara Vance. Helio-apocalypse, merger collapses, billions vanish. Marcus Thorne went from titan to pariah overnight, besieged by reporters, abandoned by his board. He became a recluse in his glass mansion, a home no longer his. As it was a key asset in the impending bankruptcy, the SEC, armed with a treasure trove of incriminating documents from a cooperating Anya Petrova, filed federal fraud charges. That was followed by a tidal wave of class action lawsuits from shareholders who had lost everything. His downfall was absolute. A cautionary tale that would be taught in business schools for generations. Anya, true to her nature, escaped prison but not disgrace. She became a footnote, a Judas in a designer suit. Her career in technology permanently over. While Marcus's world imploded, Alara's exploded. The story of Ethel was now a global phenomenon, a modern-day fable of David and Goliath, except David had built a better slingshot. The venture capitalists who had once ignored her calls now clogged her phone lines, offering blank checks and begging for a piece of the action. Alara, in a position of supreme power, accepted a record-breaking round of funding, but on her own. Non-negotiable terms, Ethel's mission and ethics would never be compromised. She retained complete control, with a war chest that rivaled a small nation's GDP. Ethel didn't just grow, it absorbed. As Thorne Industries was dismantled in bankruptcy court, Alara and Julian picked through the wreckage. They didn't buy the brand or the bad reputation. They bought the core assets for pennies on the dollar. More importantly, they hired the people, the brilliant engineers, the visionary designers, the ethical employees who had been stifled under Marcus's tyrannical reign. They all flocked to Ethel, eager to be part of something real. It wasn't a takeover, it was a liberation. 2 years later, the Ethel headquarters stood as a new landmark in the city. It wasn't a cold, imposing tower designed to intimidate, but a stunning work of architecture that embodied the Chimera philosophy, designed by Alara herself. The building was a living ecosystem. It breathed with the city, featuring vertical gardens, a zero-carbon energy footprint, and public spaces that seamlessly integrated with the surrounding community. It was open, collaborative, and beautiful. Everything Thorne Tower was not. One evening, Alara stood in her office on the top floor. It wasn't an opulent throne room, but a minimalist space with one wall made entirely of smart glass, currently displaying a breathtaking, real-time view of a city at dusk. It was New Hope, their first client. Now a thriving hub of tech and sustainable industry, the traffic flowed in elegant, harmonious patterns. The lights glowed with quiet efficiency. It was the picture of a city reborn. The door slid open, and Julian walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He was grayer now, but his eyes, once perpetually cynical, held a deep sense of peace. He handed her a mug and stood beside her, looking at the view. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble, "there are days I still can't believe we did it. That it's real. You built a machine that could think." "Julian," Alara said softly, "I just gave it a soul." He grunted, a sound that was his version of a heartfelt compliment. "And you, architect, are you happy?" Alara considered the question as she watched the pulse of the city below. She thought back to that terrible anniversary night, to the woman standing shattered in a house that felt like a tomb. She searched for the old anger, the bitterness, the heartbreak, but there was nothing. It was like trying to remember the pain of a scar that had long since faded. The man who had betrayed her was now just a ghost, a footnote in her much larger story. The betrayal, she realized, had not been the end of her life. It was the beginning. It was the brutal, violent, and necessary fire that had burned away the life that was too small for her. The life lived in someone else's shadow. It had forced her to confront the person she had kept locked away, the leader, the builder, the queen. Marcus hadn't destroyed her. He had, in his blind arrogance, unleashed her. She turned her gaze from the city and looked at her own reflection in the glass. She saw the powerful, composed woman looking back at her, a woman at peace with her past and in complete command of her future. "No," she said to Julian, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "I'm not happy." He looked at her, confused. "I'm not regretful." And in the quiet of her new kingdom, built on a foundation of truth and forged in the fires of betrayal, she knew it was the absolute truth. She regretted none of it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay with us for the next one. And while you're here, check out our other videos. There's always more to explore. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below.